if we had a victim inverted and still in their seatbelt, even though we have full side access, this is still a little bit challenging in regards to managing them correctly and doing a longboard removal, right? One of the things you can do, and this will get you into your next phase, is get that relief cut going on the rocker if you don't already have it. Put a ram in from roof line to joint and start spreading. When you start spreading, what's that naturally do to their seat? Start walking them up so that they're getting into that position to do a prone body removal. Does that make sense? You can take that application or approach, or you can open up the whole backside of the vehicle. Either way, we're going to make those relief cuts here, and we're going to put a cut right on this frame rail. One of the things you got to watch is your fuel lines and your brake lines. So you got to make sure that you have a management system in place. Whether you're going to cut them here and then crimp them with golf tees, whether you're going to cut them, bend them over and offload them into a bucket, whether you're going to wrap them on a pig, a blanket, whatever it is, you've got to control this fuel element if you've got fuel lines running in an area where you're going to snap them, break them, mess them up. Make sense? Okay, we're going to do the axle to axle fold. So you guys are going to make relief cuts right here by this beak. As soon as you make these relief cuts, it's going to weaken the back end of this structure or of this vehicle. Everybody follow that? So we've got to make sure that we've got that well stabilized. While those are still in place, we're going to come in here with chain assembly and chain hoist. We're going to rig into an anchor component up on the front of the vehicle, and we're going to rig into an anchorable component on the rear of the vehicle. We're then going to create a high fulcrum utilizing cribbing. That cribbing needs to be in line with where you make your frame rail cuts, okay? Because that's the weak point. You're going to build those about 4 high, and we'll talk about why 4 high. When you put those 4 sections of cribbing in here, and you start ratcheting on your chain hoist assembly, what do you think that cribbing is going to want to do? It's going to push down, it's going to create a weak point here, which is what we want. What else is it going to do? Oh, it's going to start pivoting. Because that chain's loaded on the top, that stack or that column's going to start doing this. It's going to start walking over. Everybody with me? If you go about 4 high, it typically gives you enough to pressurize this and get this started in an upward sequence. It starts to rack over, and right at the point where it's going to kick out, what line do you think your chain's in if you go 4 high? Pretty much straight, which means you don't get a shoom and then the vehicle shifts. You go more than 4 high, you come up here with this fulcrum, it's going to rack, it's going to kick out, and then the bottom end of the vehicle is going to drop. You want it to be a smooth transition from cribbing rack to chain capture, okay? So, relief cuts where your bees were, cut this frame rail, cut that frame rail, get this exhaust out of the way, put your cribbing fulcrum in here, and then get your chain assemblies built. Chain hoist needs to go down here, attachment points up here. We'll go through those when we get them. Make your cuts. When utilizing the axle to axle fold, it's important that you take some time to analyze your unibody and your frame components. A lot of times you'll have segmented frame elements. This is a distinctive 3-part unibody frame system. So we've got a rear suspension frame mounts, we have the passenger compartment frame mounts, and then we have the front suspension frame mounts. Typically speaking, if you have definitive sections like that, you're going to want to place your cribbing right at the fold point of the transition from frame component to frame component. Additionally speaking, a lot of times with that, you may not even have to put relief cuts on the frame rail, because as you start to pull, those 2 sections are going to start to break away from each other because those are relief points the way the vehicle is designed. So before you start cutting the frame rails, identify if you have those elements and create your cribbing fulcrum at that point. You guys all saw the distinctive differences between the unibody on the other one, right? We had integrated framing elements here that stopped, and the suspension and rear axle element that picked up here. And right here at this perpendicular column was a weak point in that framing system. In this vehicle, we got frame rail, frame and chassis. Here's our B-post running right here. So typically we're gonna make those cuts right in this area on the B-post. We're gonna brace our cribbing right across here, which comes almost in line with that break point. Everybody see that? And then we're gonna fold back here. We also have to get rid of the exhaust and the drive shaft. So all that's gotta get cut and removed. You also have to consider your fuel lines. So on older vehicles, they're gonna be integrated into the frame rails, just like they are right there. On newer vehicles, they're probably gonna be running along the underbody. If you can segment those out, cut them high, cut them low, get them out of the equation, then you're capping the ends. Make sense? And you can manage that. But you got to be cognizant of your fuel management. If you just start bending away, they're going to break at some point based on the bend, and then you're going to be free-flowing fuel in an uncontrolled manner. So make sure that you're managing your fuel issue in a controlled manner. Okay?
Rubber membrane gas. Yep.
That's good. No. Ideally, you want the ratchet somewhere back here. You want to just a clean chain coming over here. See how the trim is articulating? Your chain starting to straighten up. Almost straight. Everybody see that? We've gone 5 high. That cribbing was kicking what it did 10 seconds ago. But see that? It fell right out of place. Chain totally straight. They find the path of least resistance and do everything. It's not right there. Did it just get easy? Okay, so you hit this point where you're basically starting to look laterally and not doing too much vertical fold. If you don't have a fulcrum, it never works. You never get a vertical lift. You gotta create the fulcrum. Don't make the fulcrum too high. That's it. Everybody walk around in the back and look at your access. Now that you guys have done this, your guys are tacking undercarriage right away. Drive shaft, exhaust, get them out of the way, manage your fuel lines. Your guys on the outside are popping doors, attacking the C's and the frame rails, fulcrum toward the chain, crank away. Now the only other component we didn't integrate today is a secondary come along or chain hoist or ratchet assembly. Remember I always say I use them in pairs? I would have a second one rigged on here. Because right now, if that chain system fails, we're all in trouble, right? So I will always have a secondary one rigged in right next to it. It does 2 things for me. If you run them both in succession, what's that do to your lift? Makes everything easier, right? And if one fails, you have the redundancy of a secondary one that's going to assume the load. It also enables you to transfer loads. So if you max one out, it can hold the load while you DC the other one, extend it, reset it, and haul away. So you can piggyback off them just like you would on a rope system. And it all depends on the length of your chain hoist. If you got 20-foot chain hoist, you're not going to have an issue on this technique. If you've got 6 foot or 10 foot, you may have an issue based on the pull. Okay? Any questions about the axle pull? Pretty straightforward, isn't it? Anybody ever done this before? No. Very well done. Okay. Your initial stabilization, you're going to use this technique, is to just put wedges under those back corners on the roof line. You come in, you cut the C-posts. You have this rigged in on the roof line, and you start cranking. That's all you've done. Does that make sense? You haven't done diddly with the sides, you haven't tackled your hinges, your pins, any of those assemblies. You're going right to the roof line. This is especially effective if you've got rear access only to the vehicle. Don't tunnel. Tunneling would be remarkably slower than this application. Everybody follow me? If this is pushed up against a Jersey barrier and there's another car on the side of it and you have the ability to get to the undercarriage, just take the whole rear end out of the equation.
So you're saying you just cut the C-post and not move the side?
That's it. C-post, rig in, start pulling. That's the only thing you're doing. The whole thing displaces. So it's kind of two different applications. If you got sides, take sides. If you don't have sides, take rear. If you've got a really, really severe displacement inside of the vehicle, you're going to have to do some more stabilization, but leaving that B-post in place maintains that void between the roof line and the vehicle. Everybody follow that? Because you're making your cuts right behind the B, not in front of the B. For this to really fold effectively and not have any downward deflection on the floor, everybody come up here real quick. Don't cut all the way through your floor assemblies like you did on this side. You want to create one definitive relief point on each side, and it's frame rail and frame rail. Relief cut directly in line with those on the rocker. You start getting real deep through the floor, and you can get a potential shift of the whole floor pan that's going to go down, as opposed to all that meat staying structural and the structural members getting weak. Everybody follow that? So perfect inline cuts on your frame rails, relief cuts around your on your floor pan just behind your B post. That enables everything to open up. B stays intact. Everything around the passenger stays intact on the front side. If they're in the back, you can basically walk in there and bring them out from the sides, back, whatever you want to do at that point.